The votes were still being counted, and already his own MPs were on camera calling for his head. Not from the opposition, from inside his own party, from his own colleagues, from the people who were supposed to have his back. Keir Starmer had only been prime minister for less than 2 years. He came in promising a new Britain, a government of change, a break from chaos. But tonight, the British people delivered a verdict, and it was brutal. And the man holding the knife was someone Donald Trump calls a personal friend. What just happened to British politics, and why does it matter to every one of us watching from America? Stay right there. What you are about to watch is not just a story about a local election in Britain. It is the story of a political earthquake, one that is rewriting the rules of power in one of America's closest allies, and sending a message that the global populist wave is not slowing down. It is accelerating. In this video, we are going to break down exactly what happened in Thursday's UK local elections, the numbers, the scale, and why political scientists are already calling this historic. We are going to show you who Nigel Farage really is, why his relationship with Donald Trump matters, and what Reform UK actually stands for. And we are going to reveal the hidden story beneath the story, the scandal inside Labour that British mainstream media has barely touched, and that may be more damaging to Keir Starmer than any election result. By the end of this video, you will understand 3 things: how a party that barely existed 5 years ago just shattered Britain's political establishment, why Keir Starmer is fighting for his political life tonight, and what this means for the United States, NATO, and the balance of power in the West. We cover stories like this before anyone else. Subscribe now and hit the bell so you never miss a breaking update. Let's get into it. Thursday, May 8th, 2026. Across England, Wales, and Scotland, local council elections were underway. Over 5,000 seats contested across 163 local councils and 6 mayorships. These elections were not expected to produce fireworks. Local elections rarely do. But from the moment the first results began rolling in, it was clear something extraordinary was happening. Labour, the ruling party of Britain, was bleeding out. By the time roughly half of all councils had declared their results, Labour had suffered a net loss of nearly 500 local council seats. Nearly 500. The losses were not concentrated in one region or one type of community. They were everywhere: north, south, urban, rural, traditional strongholds, swing areas. The map was turning against Starmer on every front simultaneously. At the same moment, Reform UK, Nigel Farage's insurgent right-wing party, had posted a net gain of over 650 seats. The party was taking councils it had never held before. It was winning seats in communities that had returned Labour councillors for decades without interruption. Farage himself emerged in the early hours triumphant. He called it plainly and without any hesitation a historic change in British politics. And for once, even his critics could not say he was wrong. The results triggered an immediate crisis inside the Labour Party. Multiple MPs, elected representatives from Starmer's own party, went on camera to demand that the Prime Minister agree to a timeline for leaving office. Not quietly in private conversations, publicly, on the record. Britain woke up Friday morning to the question of whether its Prime Minister would survive the week. To understand why this is so dramatic, you need to understand what Keir Starmer's election victory looked like just 22 months ago. In July 2024, Labour won a landslide. They secured one of the largest parliamentary majorities in modern British history, ending 14 years of Conservative government. Rishi Sunak's Tories were decimated. The country, exhausted by years of political chaos, from Boris Johnson's scandals to Liz Truss's catastrophic 45-day premiership that collapsed the British pound, was desperate for stability. Starmer offered exactly that. He repositioned Labour toward the center. He disciplined the party. He expelled hard-left figures. He promised competence, economic growth, and a cleaned-up government. The British public gave him an overwhelming mandate, and within months, the goodwill began to evaporate. The issues were multiple and compounding. Economic growth remained sluggish. Energy costs stayed high. immigration numbers, far from falling, remained stubbornly elevated. Starmer's government imposed austerity-adjacent cuts, including a controversial reduction in winter fuel payments for elderly pensioners that infuriated the very working-class voters Labor depends on. Then came cultural missteps, tone-deaf messaging, a sense among many Labor heartland voters that the party had become more interested in managing identity politics debates than in addressing the kitchen table issues that matter in post-industrial towns across the north of England. By early 2026, polling was already alarming inside Labour. Reform had pulled ahead of Labour in several national polls, an extraordinary achievement for a party that had won only 5 seats at Westminster just 2 years earlier. Thursday's local elections were always going to be a test. No one inside Labour's inner circle expected this scale of defeat. The Red Wall, those traditionally Labour constituencies in the North and Midlands that had briefly voted for Boris Johnson in 2019 on the back of Brexit and had returned to Labour in 2024, was once again crumbling. But this time, the votes were not going to the Conservatives. They were going directly to Reform UK. This is the context that makes Thursday's results so devastating. This is not just a midterm protest vote. This is a structural realignment, and it is happening at a speed that has left professional political analysts struggling to keep up. Here is what Labour's own internal strategists have been warning for months, and what Thursday just confirmed in the most public and painful way possible. Stay with us, because what comes next explains why this could end not just Starmer's career, but Labour's identity as a political force. Let us talk about the people at the center of this story, because each of them represents something much larger than themselves. Keir Starmer is 63 years old. He is a former director of public prosecutions, Britain's top prosecutor. He spent years building a reputation as a serious, methodical establishment figure. He was knighted for his public service. His rise to Labour leadership in 2020 was premised on electability and pragmatism. He was the antidote to Jeremy Corbyn's radical socialism. He won the election in 2024 by being essentially the least offensive option on the table. But that same cautious managerial style is now his greatest liability. In a political climate electrified by anger, instinct, and identity, Starmer comes across to many voters as a technocrat in a moment that demands a warrior. His response to Thursday's results, accepting responsibility while refusing to resign, saying he would not walk away and plunge the country into chaos, is textbook Starmer, measured, responsible, and, to a population looking for someone who feels their pain, deeply unsatisfying. Then there is Nigel Farage, 62 years old, a political figure who has spent 3 decades engineering Brexit, surviving 5 failed attempts at winning a parliamentary seat, being banned from British state television at various points, building transatlantic friendships with Donald Trump, and outlasting virtually every political rival who underestimated him. He is Britain's most consequential opposition politician of the past 20 years, and this week he proved it once again. Farage is not a conventional conservative. He is a disruptor. His political instinct is to weaponize establishment contempt and turn it into fuel. The more he is dismissed, the stronger he gets. He has watched Trump's playbook, and he has applied it to the British context with considerable skill. Reform UK itself represents something important to understand. It is not the Conservative Party rebranded. It is a genuinely new political entity. Anti-immigration, anti-net zero, anti-green regulation, skeptical of foreign aid, deeply hostile to what it calls the cultural elite. It attracts voters who feel that neither Labour nor the Conservatives have represented them in a generation. And then there is the Labour rebel wing, MPs like John Trickett from the north of England, who represent the party's working-class roots, and who believe Starmer has fundamentally betrayed those roots by governing too centrist, too metropolitan, too cautious. Their public revolt on Thursday night was not spontaneous. It had been building for months. The election results gave them the cover and the courage to go public. Finally, there are the Green Party and independent pro-Palestinian candidates, a coalition of the disaffected urban left, heavily concentrated in constituencies with large Muslim populations. Around 60% of Muslim voters indicated willingness to back a pro-Palestinian independent rather than Labor. The Green Party's leader explicitly put Gaza on the ballot, and it worked. Labor's losses in university towns and urban cores to the left are as significant as its losses in the north to the right. Beyond the numbers, beyond the television studios, what is actually happening in these communities? In the post-industrial towns of the north of England, places like Doncaster, Rotherham, Barnsley, Hartlepool, the sentiment is not hard to understand once you listen to it. These are communities that lost their manufacturing base over 40 years ago and never fully recovered. Coal mines closed, steelworks shuttered, the middle-class jobs never came. The promises of regeneration never materialized. For decades, those communities voted Labor out of loyalty, a tribal allegiance rooted in the memory of the Union movement and the welfare state. Then in 2016, they voted overwhelmingly for Brexit, in a referendum Farage had almost single-handedly forced onto the political agenda. They were trying to send a message. By 2024, many of them gave Labor one more chance under Starmer. Now, in 2026, they are done waiting. What they hear from Reform is simple. Your culture matters. Your concerns about immigration are legitimate. Your jobs deserve protection. And the people who have been governing you for 40 years have failed you. That message is crude, but in these communities, it is landing. On the urban left, the dynamic is equally raw. In cities like Bradford, Birmingham, Leicester, and pockets of London, the issue driving voter behavior is not the economy. It is Gaza. Muslim communities, which constitute a significant and growing proportion of Labor's traditional electorate in many urban constituencies, have felt betrayed by Starmer's positioning on the Israel-Gaza conflict, which they view as insufficiently critical of Israeli military operations. The statistics are striking. Roughly half of Muslim voters willing to back the Green Party to deny Labor a win. 60% willing to support a pro-Palestinian independent. For Labor, this two-front squeeze, losing working-class Northerners to Reform on the right and Muslim urban voters to Greens and independents on the left, is an existential crisis. You cannot hold a governing coalition when your base is being carved off from both ends simultaneously. The Conservatives, for their part, are watching this all from an equally uncomfortable position. They lost roughly 300 seats of their own on Thursday. Their traditional voter base is being poached by Reform. The center-right ground that the Conservatives occupied for a century is being occupied by a newer, angrier, more populist force. Kemi Badenoch, the current Conservative leader, is trying to position herself against both Reform and Labor, but Thursday's results suggest she has made almost no progress in rebuilding after the catastrophic 2024 general election defeat. But here is the part no one in the American media is covering, and it changes everything about what we think we know about Keir Starmer's political situation. If you are finding this valuable, subscribe right now. We are just getting to the most important part of this story. The reaction to Thursday's results has been immediate and global in scope. In Washington, the results are being watched with considerable interest. Nigel Farage's close personal friendship with Donald Trump is not incidental. It is politically significant. Farage was one of the first international politicians to visit Trump at Mar-a-Lago after the 2024 election. He campaigned alongside Trump multiple times. Trump has publicly called him a great guy and expressed admiration for his political instincts. If Reform UK continues on its current trajectory toward meaningful parliamentary power by the next UK general election, which must occur by 2028, the question of whether Britain's foreign policy shifts toward closer alignment with Trump's America becomes very real. That matters enormously for NATO, Ukraine, and the geopolitical architecture of the Western world. Farage has historically been skeptical of NATO expansion, has expressed understanding of Russia's position in the Ukraine conflict, and has criticized the level of British financial support for Kyiv. A Britain led by or heavily influenced by Reform would be a fundamentally different partner for the United States and Europe. In Europe, the reaction is a mixture of alarm and resignation. French, German, and European Commission officials have been watching the UK populist surge as a confirmation of a continental trend they are already battling at home. Marine Le Pen's Rassemblement National in France, the AfD in Germany, Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy, all represent different national expressions of the same underlying anger, a working-class rejection of technocratic globalist governance. Britain's Thursday results are being read in European capitals as confirmation that the populist tide has not been stopped. In Downing Street, the immediate instinct was damage control. Starmer's team moved quickly to project calm, acknowledging the losses, accepting accountability, but insisting that the government would adjust course. The problem with that message is that it sounds identical to promises made after every previous Labour dip in the polls, promises that were never fully delivered. A growing number of Labour MPs clearly believe the party cannot recover under Starmer's leadership, and they are no longer keeping that view private. On social media, the response has been explosive. Farage's declaration of a historic change in British politics trended globally. Video clips of Labour MPs calling for Starmer to resign circulated across X, YouTube, and TikTok with millions of views. The broader global conversation about whether establishment centrist parties can survive in a populist era is being conducted in real time, with Britain as the latest and most dramatic exhibit. Now, here is what the mainstream British media has been significantly underreporting, and what provides critical context for understanding just how deep Keir Starmer's crisis actually runs. In recent weeks prior to the local elections, Starmer's government became embroiled in a controversy involving the appointment of an individual with reported connections to Jeffrey Epstein's network to a public role. The story broke, triggered significant backlash, and Starmer faced what was described as a party revolt even before Thursday's votes were cast. That pre-existing internal fury, MPs already restless, already questioning Starmer's judgment, was the kindling. Thursday's election results were the match. Most of the coverage of Thursday's results is framing this purely as an electoral story. Reform surges, Labour collapses. But the internal Labour revolt is not solely about the election results. It was already underway. The election gave rebel MPs the opportunity and the justification to go public with demands that had been building since the Epstein-linked appointment story. This is not just about vote counts.
It is about a prime minister whose MPs had already begun to lose faith in his judgment, and who now have a democratic mandate to express that loss of faith publicly. There is a second hidden dimension, Reform UK's own vulnerability. Farage's party has gained over 650 council seats in a single night. That is extraordinary. But winning seats and governing are very different things. Many of Reform's newly elected councillors are untested. Some have controversial social media histories, and the party has essentially no infrastructure for local governance at scale. The real test of Reform is not whether it can win seats on a wave of anger. It is whether it can run a pothole repair service, manage a local planning committee, and deliver on the very basic functions of local government without generating scandals that undermine its national image. History is instructive here. UKIP, Farage's previous vehicle, surged in European Parliament elections, won local council seats, and then largely imploded as its personnel proved unable to sustain the discipline required for responsible governance. Farage knows this. It is one reason he has worked hard to professionalize Reform's candidate selection. But with 650 new council members elected in a single night, quality control has almost certainly slipped. And now for the stakes. Because what happens next in British politics over the next 6 to 12 months could reshape the entire Western alliance at a moment when that alliance is already under unprecedented strain. Subscribe now if you haven't already. This is where the story gets genuinely consequential. The stakes of what happened Thursday in Britain go well beyond one country's domestic politics.
Start with the immediate domestic consequences. Keir Starmer faces a leadership challenge that could come in days, weeks, or months. If he survives, he will be a fatally weakened prime minister, governing without genuine authority inside his own party, facing a surging opposition at the next general election. His ability to push through major legislation, to maintain party discipline, to credibly represent Britain on the world stage is all diminished the moment his own MPs are on camera calling for his resignation. If he does not survive, if Labour MPs force a leadership contest, the party faces months of internal civil war at precisely the moment it needs to be governing. The next Labour leader would inherit a party that is simultaneously being attacked from the left on Gaza and human rights and from the right on immigration and economic competence. There is no easy path back to electoral relevance for Labour in the near term.
For Reform UK, the stakes are equally high, but in a different direction. A strong performance in local elections is not a general election victory. Britain's first-past-the-post electoral system is extraordinarily brutal to insurgent parties. In 2024, Reform won 14% of the national vote and only 5 parliamentary seats. Farage's ambition, a reform government or a reform-dominated parliament, requires either a collapse of the Conservative Party that drives its voters permanently to reform or an electoral reform that introduces proportional representation. Neither is guaranteed. For the United States, the stakes center on alliance reliability. Britain is America's most important intelligence partner through the Five Eyes Agreement, its closest diplomatic ally, and a key contributor to NATO and Ukraine support.
A Britain in political crisis, with a weakening centrist government and a rising populist opposition with skeptical views on Ukraine and NATO expansion, is a less reliable partner. That is not speculation. It is the direct implication of what Thursday's results represent. For Europe, the stakes involve the stability of the post-Brexit relationship. Britain outside the EU is already a complex partner. A Britain moving toward Farage's worldview would be an even more complicated one, skeptical of multilateral commitments, more transactional in its approach to European security, and more aligned with Trump's America First framework. And for the global populist movement, the stakes are symbolic and psychological. Thursday's results in Britain will be studied in every capital in the democratic world as evidence that anti-establishment sentiment is not fading. It is deepening, it is finding new vehicles, and it is winning.
Political scientists and analysts watching Thursday's results have been largely consistent in their assessment. This is genuinely unprecedented in the modern era of British politics. Academic observers of the UK electoral system have noted that the simultaneous collapse of both major parties, Labour and the Conservatives, losing seats at the same time to the same insurgent force, combined with losses on Labour's left flank to the Greens and Independents, represents the kind of multi-front electoral collapse that typically presages a fundamental restructuring of a country's party system. Britain has had a functionally two-party system, rotating power between Labour and the Conservatives, for over a century. Thursday's results are the most powerful evidence yet that this system is breaking down. Electoral historians point to parallels with the collapse of the Liberal Party in the early 20th century, which was replaced by Labour as one of Britain's two governing forces. The question being asked in academic circles is whether we are watching Labour undergo the same process, being squeezed from both flanks until it is no longer a viable governing coalition. Foreign policy analysts in London and Washington are focused specifically on the NATO and Ukraine implications. Several senior transatlantic policy researchers have observed publicly that a Britain influenced by Farage's worldview would represent a significant shift in the Western consensus on Ukraine. Farage has previously stated that the West's actions provoked Russia and that Britain should reconsider its level of support for Kyiv. If reform continues to rise and its positions begin to constrain what any future British government can do on Ukraine, the consequences for European security are tangible. Conservative Party strategists speaking to British media have noted the existential danger to their own party. The Conservatives have historically been the natural home of the British right. Reform is now competing directly for that territory. Several analysts have argued that the Conservatives face a choice: attempt to absorb Reform's positions and voters by shifting sharply rightward, risking their appeal to moderate centrists, or maintain their current positioning and watch Reform continue to cannibalize their base.
Labour strategists who spoke anonymously to British outlets in the hours following Thursday's results were blunt. The party needs to make a fundamental choice about what it is and who it represents. The current coalition of northern working-class voters, metropolitan professionals, and urban minority communities has fractured. The three groups want incompatible things. Without a clear answer to that question of identity, Labour risks spending years in opposition, perhaps a decade or more. Remember the question we started with: will Keir Starmer survive? Here is what we now know, and it is more complicated than a simple yes or no.
Because the real question is not whether Starmer goes. It is whether the party he leads can survive the answer either way. Three scenarios are now in play. They are not equally likely, but all three are credible given what we know.
Best case for Starmer and British stability. Keir Starmer weathers the immediate storm. The calls for resignation fade as Labour MPs calculate that a leadership contest would be even more damaging than sticking with a wounded leader. Starmer makes a significant course correction on immigration, on economic messaging, perhaps on Gaza, that begins to stabilize Labour's position. Reform's local governance stumbles generate negative headlines that slow its momentum. The Conservatives begin to recover under Badenoch, creating a three-way competitive dynamic that prevents any single force from dominating. British politics remains messy but functional. Likely case: managed transition. Starmer announces in the coming months that he will not lead Labour into the next general election. He manages a dignified exit, allowing the party to conduct a leadership contest.
Labour's new leader, possibly a northern working-class background figure designed to win back red wall voters, attempts a repositioning. The next general election, due by 2028, is a genuine three-way contest between Labour, Reform, and the Conservatives, with no party winning an outright majority. Britain enters a period of coalition or minority government, a genuinely new political era. Worst case, for Labour and Western cohesion, Starmer is forced out in a messy, chaotic leadership battle that consumes the party for months. Reform continues to surge. The Conservatives fail to recover. At the next general election, Reform wins enough seats, aided by tactical voting and potential Conservative collapse, to either govern in some form or exert decisive influence over any possible government. Britain's foreign policy shifts. NATO contributions are questioned, Ukraine support is reduced, and the global populist wave finds its most consequential European success story yet. Before we close, we want to hear from you, because this story raises two of the most important political questions of our time. First, do you think the global populist wave that we saw in the United States with Donald Trump, that we are now seeing in Britain with Nigel Farage, can be sustained, or does it eventually collapse under the weight of its own inability to govern? History suggests populist movements are much better at winning elections than running governments. But history also suggested Britain would never leave the European Union. So tell us, where do you think this goes? And second, what does Keir Starmer do now? Does he fight on, absorb the losses, and attempt a course correction? Or does he accept that he has become the obstacle to Labour's recovery and step aside? Is there even a Labour leader who could actually solve what Labour's structural problem has become? Drop your answers in the comments below. We read every single one. And this debate is one that genuinely matters, not just for British viewers, but for everyone watching the balance of Western power shift in real time. Here are the three things you must take away from tonight's story. Number one, Nigel Farage and Reform UK have achieved something that most political observers said was structurally impossible in the British electoral system. They have broken through, not at the margins, substantially, and they have done it by absorbing the anger of voters that both establishment parties had abandoned. Number two, Keir Starmer's Labour government is in a genuine existential crisis, not just an electoral setback. It is being attacked simultaneously from the right and the left. It has lost the emotional loyalty of its core working-class base, and the Epstein-linked appointment scandal adds a layer of credibility damage that has nothing to do with policy
and everything to do with judgment.
This is a compounding crisis, and the next 72 hours will be critical.
Number 3, this is not just a British story. The populist realignment reshaping British politics is the same force reshaping American politics, French politics, German politics, and the global order. What happens next in London has direct implications for NATO, Ukraine, and the strategic posture of the Western alliance. This story is not over. In fact, what happens in the next 72 hours could change everything, including whether Britain's Prime Minister is still in office by the time you watch our next video. Subscribe and hit the bell, because when it breaks, we will be the first to cover it. And remember this, the voters of Britain did not vote for chaos on Thursday. They voted for change. Whether the political system can actually deliver it, that is the question that will define Britain's next decade.